Here with Margaret Floyd, functional nutritionist. Margaret has been part of my medical team, my healthcare, my wellness team for a long time. I consider her a friend, and I'm so glad she's here. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Nicole. It's great to be here.
So let's talk about blood sugar. This is such a big topic, and I think there's no better expert to talk about it than you. I I would love for you to, first of all, talk about your experiences with this, how you got into it, and let's start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, recognizing blood sugar issues were a big piece of my puzzle was one of the first wake up calls I had when I started studying nutrition. So just a little bit of background on me. I had a long love affair with sugar. In fact, if you talked to me in my mid 20s and told me that there was life without sugar, I basically would have told you you were just flat out crazy and wrong. And at the time, I was a vegetarian, so I considered myself to be very healthy. But really, what I was is what I now think of as a carbivore. I just ate different forms of sugar all day long, starting
Yeah,
with
a junk food vegetarian.
oh,
I've been there.
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The plain bagel, like goodness, don't put any fat on that thing. I mean, all day it was starch, starch, starch. And I had such severe hypoglycemia. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but that means very low blood sugar. And it just you go on this roller coaster ride in terms of your energy levels, your focus. It became actually quite a thing where I worked. I'm a very like on type A kind of person. And I would suddenly just like kind of like tune out, like just leave the premises. I just completely space out. And I would barely even notice this was happening. But my colleagues got to recognize the signs of like, Margaret's physical presence is there, but she has like left the building. And they just learned to like slide a piece of chocolate in front of me. And I would like, oh, chocolate. And I would eat the chocolate and I'd right back and, in the game. And this was my life. I mean, I thought of myself as a very healthy person because I was vegetarian and because I was thin. I'm blessed with fast metabolism, sort of no matter what I eat, which has been a blessing, but also a curse because I was actually really sick inside. I could not fathom life without coffee. My entire day was structured around feeding myself. When was my next meal? When was the chocolate? An afternoon without chocolate, like just didn't even happen. Interspersed with coffee. At the end of the day, I would switch from caffeine to my wine. It's kind of shocking. I don't know that I even drank a glass of water in the day. So I was a total mess. I had migraines all the time. I had severe digestive issues. As I said, I was like just this energy roller coaster all day long.
And that's not even being addicted to soda. That's
Oh
just,
no, I didn't actually drink
yeah.
soda. No, I didn't drink soda. I just did everything else. Um, and I grew up in a family where, we had dessert every single night, like even if there wasn't a formal dessert, it was definitely a couple of cookies at least, so it was just what you did. And I didn't think of it as a big issue. And it was interesting when I went to study nutrition. I can remember we ran some of the assessments that we would be using with clients on ourselves. And I can remember running one of these assessments. And I, of course, was sitting there thinking, I'm going to do great on this thing. And it came back. I mean, my scores were just off the charts in not the good direction. And I remember taking this up to my instructor and saying, like, what's going on? And she kind of looked at me and she's like, vegetarian, right? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you eat a lot of starch, right? I'm like, well, yeah. Is that a bad thing? And she's like, oh, you'll see this all the time. That sort of opened my eyes to this even being an issue. And I recalibrated my system and did a lot of the work that we're going to talk about today to change things up. And it's a totally different world without sugar. I mean, it is completely possible to be go 5-6 hours without a meal and not sort of punch somebody because you're so hangry, and to just maybe be a little bit hungry but no other symptoms, and to not need a nap or a coffee or chocolate in the middle of the afternoon. These are things that I find a lot of people who are really addicted to sugar don't even realize is possible, and I certainly didn't back in the day.
Yeah. It's kind of funny now, but it actually is so sad to think about how reliant we were on sugar and how much it controlled us. That's the part that scares me and makes me sad.
It is. It has the same qualities as any addictive substance, and it is so embedded into our social fabric that it's actually really challenging to step outside of it, because in the corporate world, when there's sort of endless. I remember being in the corporate world and having, like, there was the box of or the big glass jar of, like, just candies and chocolates that was on the receptionist's table,
Yeah.
available at all
Yeah.
times. And any festivity for any birthday or anything that we were celebrating was all sugar and treats. And think about our poor kids who, to try to keep them away from sugar, we get accused of being horrible, depriving parents.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a challenge because it's so woven into the fabric of what we do on a day-to-day basis in our society.
It really does take, in my opinion, sort of being the weird one
Mhm.
to actually be a responsible parent and just do what's best for our children's health.
I know.
Some people might not like that, but it's just been my experience. So, but so let's talk about, other than these anecdotal impacts of blood sugar, what is actually happening in the body metabolically?
Okay.
What is blood sugar?
Yeah, what is blood sugar? So blood sugar is literally glucose in your blood. If you've ever had blood work that your doctor has run, you will see glucose is typically one of the first markers on the panel. And that's telling you your blood sugar. So the sugar, this is one of your primary sources of fuel in your body, tells us the sugar level in your blood in that moment. So there is, maintaining your proper, I'm just going to call it blood sugar. It's like proper glucose management, but basically proper blood sugar levels is one of the body's absolute top priorities. It will go to great lengths. If that blood sugar starts to get too high or too low, it will go to great lengths to try to bring it back into what I call your blood sugar happy zone. So it's a fairly narrow range within which your body really wants to maintain that blood sugar level. So anything too high, anything too low is a really big deal for your system. So the ideal scenario is that when you wake up in the morning, your blood sugar might be on the low end, but you don't want it to be too low. You just want it to be kind of on the lower end of that happy range. And you eat a nice balanced breakfast. And what we'll have, we'll talk about what that looks like in a moment. But you eat a nice balanced breakfast. It doesn't have too much starch in it. Doesn't have anything that's going to spike that blood sugar. So you just get this nice, gentle, slow rise. Okay. And so here's that upper threshold, and the blood sugar levels are starting to push up. And as the blood sugar starts to reach that upper threshold, your pancreas secretes the hormone insulin. Now, we've all heard about insulin, right? And insulin's job is to basically take any excess sugar from the blood and shuttle it into your liver cells, into muscle cells, and it stores it as glycogen, which is basically stored sugar, storing it there for later use. So that basically helps that blood sugar from not going above that upper threshold. So now you're using energy, so the blood sugar levels are starting to dip down a little bit. There's a little bit more time that's come, and then as your blood sugar levels start to reach that lower threshold, there is another hormone that we don't hear nearly as much about as insulin. It's called glucagon. It's also secreted by your pancreas, and glucagon's job is basically the exact opposite of insulin. It's to take that stored glycogen and mobilize it back into the blood to use as fuel. So it does that. So we don't ever go below that threshold, right? Like it just kind of eases in here. It starts to go up a little bit. Probably at this point, you're having your next meal. And then you have this just nice, gentle ebb and flow. And in that scenario, which is this ideal scenario, the thing is, you in your body, you don't really feel anything. You just feel good. So this is the scenario where you wake up in the morning, maybe you're a little bit hungry, maybe not. You can, ideally with really good metabolic health. You have what we call metabolic flexibility, meaning that you can use sugar as fuel. You can also use fat really effectively as a fuel. So, your body is using whatever fuel source is available. Maybe you're a little bit hungry. When you have your breakfast, you just feel good. You don't feel kind of manic energy. You certainly don't feel like sluggish and tired. You just feel good. As I said before, you can go, you don't have to worry about eating every 2 hours. You can go several hours without needing to eat again. And then by the time you eat the next meal again, you just feel good. And so this sort of continues through the whole day until it's an appropriate time to go to bed and you start to feel a little tired and you go to bed. It's possible, and that's the ideal scenario in terms of energy management. It's just feeling good. What happens, unfortunately, in many situations, especially when we have impaired blood sugar regulation, what happens, let's say when you wake up, instead of eating a nice balanced meal, you eat a meal that is filled with things that convert quickly to sugar. Now, I'm not just talking about some kind of kids cereal loaded with sugar that you then put more sugar on top of. I'm talking about things like, a couple of slices of whole wheat toast with nut butter. I'm talking about oatmeal. I'm talking about, a lot of things that we think of, a lot of smoothies, a lot of juices, some of these things that we think of as healthy foods. And there might be aspects of them that are healthy. But if they convert really quickly in your bloodstream to sugar, what happens, and a lot of those things I just mentioned do, what happens is instead of that blood sugar kind of nice ebb and flow, kind of creeping up nice and slowly, you get this big spike. And now your blood sugar has spiked up and past that upper threshold. So what your body does in response is it pumps out insulin, because this is a state of emergency. Remember, I told you this is one of the top priorities of the body. So your body pumps out a bunch of insulin, and now all that insulin's out there, and it stores all this extra sugar. Now it stores as much of it as it can as glycogen in your muscle cells and liver cells. But the thing with glycogen is that you only have a limited capacity to store glycogen. You can't just store it infinitely. And when those glycogen stores are full, guess where that excess sugar goes? Fat. So we're storing some as glycogen, we're storing some as fat, and now you've just got so much insulin in the bloodstream that you have this equal and opposite reaction. And now the blood sugar crashes down too fast below that lower threshold. We all know this feeling, right? You can think about when you do eat something that's just overtly sugary, like a sundae or something like this. You get the kind of manic high, and then you get the crash. And so that kind of high and low is happening even with something like having oatmeal for breakfast. So now there's ways to make the oatmeal an okay thing, if that really is your thing. We'll talk about that as well. But so now what happens is this blood sugar has crashed below that bottom threshold. And the kicker of this is that hormone glucagon, it simply can't mobilize enough glycogen to compensate, right? It's out there doing its absolute best, but it's not going to pull you out of a crash like this. So what happens in that crash? Well, we get really irritable. This is where the hangry, if I don't eat, I'm going to punch somebody in the nose. This is when you might get headachy. For me, I would just literally leave my body. And what's happening metabolically is your body is just trying so hard to bring those blood sugar levels back. And so if you don't succumb to one of these cravings, it's appropriate. Now you will also crave, I didn't say that, you will crave something in a mad way. Now it might be just straight up sugar, you might crave chocolate like I used to, but it also might look like craving fruit, craving alcohol, craving something a little starchy, craving caffeine. So here's why. First of all, anything that's just overtly going to increase those blood sugar levels quickly, it's actually an appropriate thing because you're in a state of emergency with blood sugar levels that are too low. So your body is not giving you sort of false information. It's in a state of emergency. The thing is that what will happen is if you succumb to the craving, you just have gone straight back up and the cycle repeats all day long. That's why what you eat for breakfast is so important in terms of setting the tone for the rest of your day. But also what will happen, let's say you just muscle through and you fight that craving. Well, your stress hormones cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, they're going to come crashing into the rescue, because it's a little bit like, well, glucagon's not up to the effort. This is a state of emergency. So we're going to like fire these adrenal glands, send out these stress hormones, and like put a rush of sugar back into the blood. Now, think about the stress response, right? Like the stress response is designed to help us run from like a woolly mammoth, right? And the stress response is normally like flood of this sugar into the blood, and then we go do something with that, something very physical, huge exertion. But when it's just a simple situation of low blood sugar, you get the same physiological response, but then we're not doing anything with it. We're like at our desk, right?
Yes.
In traffic. And so what that does metabolically, once again, put you in a state of holding onto fat. So what's happening here, you're storing fat, you're certainly not mobilizing it, and you're now putting yourself metabolically in a state where it is more likely that you're going to hold on to more fat. So, and it's state of emergency, state of emergency. And now, once you're on this roller coaster, up and down, it is really, really hard to get off of that. This is why what you eat for breakfast, as I said before, what you eat for breakfast sets the tone. Because if you eat something that's only going to have this nice, gentle, slow, gradual increase in blood sugar, then you're not as likely to have this major crash, which then kind of sets off the cycle. Now, there's subtleties to this. There's other clinical considerations, but this is kind of the big picture. Now, just to answer the question of probably thinking, well, what does a breakfast that doesn't do this look like? It's something that's more like protein and veggies, right? Classic eggs and veggies, a little bit of avocado for some good fats in there. I mean, really any kind of protein and veggies. If you're going to have a starchier breakfast, making sure that there's a lot of good fats in there and that there's protein added to it. Like if you're going to have a bowl of oatmeal, make sure to add either some ghee or some coconut milk or some butter, some nuts. Make sure that you maybe some nut butter, maybe add some collagen in there to get a little extra protein. And it's very bio individual. You know, certain foods are very consistently spike everyone's blood sugar. Then there's others that are, like I can eat a banana and it's fine. You know, my spouse might not be able to eat a banana and it's fine. And then we can talk about tools that will help you kind of dial that in even more. But generally speaking, something that's more kind of protein and veggies is going to be much more conducive to stable blood sugar throughout the rest of the day than something that's starchier.
And other than these mood swings and energy crashes and ups and downs, what other impacts does blood sugar have on our health?
Well, sugar in and of itself, and I think it's really important to say that when we're talking about sugar, we've already kind of alluded to it here, but we think of sugar and we think like chocolate bars and ice cream, but you need to expand your definition of sugar to anything that causes that blood sugar spike. Okay. So sugar overall has very serious consequences. What we just talked about was sort of the metabolic consequences. So energy roller coaster, weight gain, that will impact sleep, because when you have your blood sugar doing this all day, it doesn't just like even out perfectly when you go to sleep. It's still doing this. And let me tell you, a blood sugar crash in the middle of the night, if you've ever woken up and you're hungry, well, that's a really big sign that you shouldn't need to eat in the middle of the night. If you wake up and you're actually hungry, then yes, you are definitely having a blood sugar crash. But when those adrenal hormones come in to sort of save the day in the middle of the night, it's very stimulating. And so if you're somebody who falls asleep fine, but you wake up in the middle of the night, you're up for a couple of hours, that's almost guaranteed to be a low blood sugar issue. And you're just in the middle of the night, you're having that crash, those stimulating hormones come out, and now you got a rush of adrenaline in your system. So you're lying there wide awake in bed. So it impacts your sleep. Now it impacts mood. One of the things with sugar is it does stimulate the release of like serotonin and some of these really good, feel good neurotransmitters. The challenge is that in the long term, it also depletes them. So you get this sort of short-term rush, but the long term, then you start to have a depletion in these neurotransmitters, which are our feel-good transmitters, and we want them. So we start to crave more. This is where it becomes very much like a drug, because we feel that. I mean, we all, I think, can agree that even if you don't feel good, like I definitely at the point where if I eat sugar now, I feel like kind of sick. But I might feel kind of sick, but I get a bit of a rush, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And one of the reasons is because that sugar high, well, it's not good for you, feels good. And the second thing is it's causing this rush of these neurotransmitters, feel good neurotransmitters, but it's depleting them in the long term. So you just sort of need more and more. So it sets up the cycle of cravings, and it can really, really mess with your moods, not to mention the whole hangry, if either, maybe someone who's watching this, maybe you resonate with this, or maybe you know someone in your life.
Even our kids.
Oh,
Even our kids. Yeah.
Big time. They get low blood sugar and they just turn into monsters.
Yeah.
Monsters. But it's not their fault. It's because
they're not always just 7, or it's not, well, they're just 5. Sometimes it's just that they're on the sugar roller coaster and we can't see it.
100%. I can share that, when in the before times, when kids were allowed to share food at school and school was normal. I can remember we had a lot of challenges with our daughter eating. They have a thing at her school called the no thank you table, which is like the bane of my existence, because it's cafeteria food that is very, very low quality. And the kids who get it, that they don't want something, they just put it on the no thank you table, and it's just there for anyone to take. So it's, chocolate milk and garbage. And so it was interesting. We noticed in terms of mood, she would be home for the weekend and she would be great. And she'd go back to school Monday morning and she'd be kind of normal. But by the end of the week, I can remember like a Thursday afternoon on sessions with clients, hearing like screaming child coming down the street and thinking, oh dear, there she is. And she would just emotionally deteriorate by the end of the week. And then we would have her home again, eating all our food exclusively for the weekend, and she'd be fine. And we figured out that she was sneaking all of these things that she wasn't supposed to be eating at school. And it was literally crippling her emotionally. I mean, she was unrecognizable by the end of the week.
Yeah.
So it really makes a huge, huge difference.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I mean, there's, sugar itself, it suppresses the immune system. There's entire processes in the immune system that shut down with even something as simple as like a tablespoon of sugar. So this idea of like something like orange juice when kids are sick, terrible idea. That stuff is loaded with sugar. It's not, and all the vitamin C you think you're getting has been depleted. So it's not, you want to do something much more nourishing than anything that has sugar in it when you're sick, because part of the immune system, there's these cells called, oh my gosh, I just lost the words, but they phagocyte. They're macrophages, that's the word for it. They're big eaters. So they basically come and like eat up bacteria and things that you don't want to have there. And when you have even as little as a tablespoon of sugar, that macrophagic ability just stops for, I can't remember the time, it's like an hour or something like this. So, incredible impact on the immune system, also fallout on the hormones. I mean, there really isn't a system in your body that isn't negatively affected by the consumption of sugar.
So you are not just talking about glucose from straight up sugar, refined or not. Tell us a little bit more about how you are defining sugar.
Well, as I was saying, it's really about how quickly it impacts the blood sugar levels. You've heard the term, maybe the glycemic index or glycemic load, slightly different variations on the same kind of theme. But the idea of glycemic index and glycemic load is how quickly that sugar response happens in the body. And a little stat that surprises a lot of people is that if you had 2 slices of whole wheat bread and a tablespoon of white sugar, which one do you think has a higher glycemic impact?
I'm going to say with a wheat toast.
The toast, the bread.
Yeah.
The bread has a way greater impact on one's blood sugar than just the sugar. So we really have to expand and really think about it in terms of starches. I like to talk about it in terms of starch, as opposed to just in terms of sugar. So think about, in fact, we had a little educational moment this morning at my breakfast table, because I was talking to my 2 daughters. So one's 5, one is 9. We were having a conversation. We're setting our intentions for the day. And I said, we were going to be chatting about sugar. And Sia, who was having, what was she having? Well, she was actually having, she'd had some beans. She loves to have her beans. And then she had a half a thing of a gluten-free bagel with some cream cheese, and she had a little bit of jam. So it was kind of a treat breakfast for her. And she was like, oh, the jam is sugar. I'm like, oh, actually, so is the bread. And the beans, even, they have a slower glycemic index for sure, because there's just so much fiber and a little bit of protein and stuff in there. So the beans are a lower glycemic, but they still do convert into sugar. So it was an interesting conversation to like kind of learn what, the eggs on my plate didn't convert to sugar, but a lot of other things that we weren't thinking of that, I had a bowl of berries and we talked about how they convert to sugar slowly, but they do convert to sugar as well. So really we're thinking about any kind of grains and any product from grains, cereals, crackers, breads, certainly pastries, pastas, pizza dough, and anything like that is something that we think of as starchy and is going to have that glycemic impact. Fruits, and there are certain fruits that have lower glycemic impact than others, like the berries or like a green apple. They don't have nearly as much of a sugar impact, but something like melons, some citrus. And this is actually where it becomes a little bit more bio individual. Some people tolerate certain types of fruit better than others, but fruits are definitely very sweet. A lot of things that we drink, juices, even green juices they're just very, very high in sugars. Dairy can be, so dairy is interesting. So certain types of dairy are much higher in sugars than others. But what's also interesting about dairy is what we call insulinemic, which means it causes that insulin spike even in the absence of sugar. So it's definitely one of these really questionable ones as well. So that's kind of things that we drink other than green juices. I mean, something like kombucha that's made commercially, those actually have quite a bit of sugar still in them. And certainly any kind of like sodas or, a lot of alcohol is loaded with sugar. So these kinds we have to think about.
So why is it so hard to quit?
Well, when you're on this cycle like this, it's hard to get off of it. It's very addictive. The mood piece we talked about, it pumps out some happy neurotransmitters in the short term. So we crave it. And so it's hard for a number of reasons. It's hard because of what it's doing to us physiologically. It's hard because of what we started off this conversation talking about. It's everywhere socially, right? There's a lot of social pressure around it, but it's also ubiquitous within our diet. So there's going to be places that you probably don't realize you're getting sugar, that you're getting sugar. We have a program where what we do is we take out for 3 weeks anything and everything that will spike that sugar levels, anything and everything. And one of the things that people in this program are always amazed about are things like, salad dressings, meat, like anything that has been
sweet potatoes.
Well, sweet potatoes, yes, totally.
Certainly potatoes.
Oh, certainly potatoes, corn, but a lot of their favorite condiments they don't realize are loaded with sugar. Even something like, I think salad dressing, we sort of think that salad dressing is supposed to be so virtuous. We're having this salad, and then you look at the ingredients in most commercially made salad dressings, and they're loaded with sugar of some sort, as well as really poor quality vegetable oils. So salad dressings are actually like, proceed with caution. We just recommend that you make your own. They're super easy, super simple, and much yummier and much healthier if you make it yourself. But a lot of things, even like, a lot of like commercially made like hummus and salsas and these things where you would just think like, why would you put salt with sugar in here?
Right.
There's a lot of sugar in those things.
And they hide it under the name of so many things also.
I saw something where there's like over 200 different names for sugar. It's just, it's crazy. The best strategy is to really try to buy things with as few ingredients. You recognize all of the ingredients on the label, and none of them either end. If it ends in OSE, like dextrose, maltose, any ose, that's a sugar. So that's a little cube, although it's not limited to that by any stretch of the imagination. There's other language. Any syrups, fruit extracts, those are all code for sugar.
So You've heard it once, you've heard it 100,000 times, and you're hearing it again today.
100%.
Just in case you didn't get the message.
I know, I'm sure everyone talks about this. It's so foundational.
Yeah. So how does one outside, you mentioned your 3-week Eat Naked Kitchens, 3-week sugar detox. How else do we get sugar out of our diet? Where do people start? What does one do? And what approaches work best for different people?
So with sugar, it is one of those situations where ripping off the Band-Aid is actually, in the short term, much more challenging, but in the long term, much, much more effective. It is incredibly hard to just sort of pick and choose your way through this and say like, okay, I mean, some people will say, okay, I'm going to take out overt forms of sugar. So no desserts or no sodas, or I'm not going to add sweetener to my coffee or tea. And that can be a really good starting point. It's a slippery slope. And it's hard to do because sugar is very addictive. And my experience clinically has been, when I describe this spike and crash, if you can identify those foods, and we've got a handout for you guys that lists the main categories of the foods that you want to pull out. So whether you want to do the full program or not, this is going to give you the cheat sheet of the key things that you want to pull out. If you can just be really ruthless and pull those things out for 3 weeks, and I'm not going to lie, there's going to be some days in there that suck. Right. I mean, Nicole, you've done this program. There's a few days where it just like, it hurts. And you realize what an impact it's having on you. I mean, the fact that you can pull these foods out and actually have like headaches and be so tired. And, there's some things that will come up. So we don't want to pretty this up and make it, this is going to be, your life's going to be just perfect and easy.
But I've done it enough times so that I know what it feels like on the other end of it. And that for me is motivation to get through it. But people that haven't done it before, and there are many people who have lived decades on the same diet because their parents started them on it, they don't know what it feels like to be completely clear-headed and have energy all day and not be reliant on external substances to get through the day, just to be able to function, let alone feel good.
Here's the thing. Life on the other side of sugar feels better than you probably even know possible. For a lot of people, the standard, the baseline is low, right? And we use a lot of different substances and foods and things to kind of keep us going throughout the day. And then when you pull a big heavy hitter like sugar out of your diet, there is that moment of recalibration. But what we're doing, I like to describe it as a chiropractic adjustment for your blood sugar handling, because what we're doing is we're taking you off this dependence on this one fuel source and expanding your ability to actually burn fat as a fuel. So a great analogy, maybe you've heard this before, great analogy is if you think about what you would use to burn a fire. You have the kindling, and then you have the logs. Well, the kindling is like sugar. Burns fast, dies out. Burns hot, dies out, right? The logs are that steady, slow burn. That's like the fat in your diet. And ideally, you want to be able to be very, what we call metabolically flexible. You're able to use you're able to burn sugar. If you have it, you're able to flip over to being more of a fat burner. And it sustains you in between meals. If you think about it, if you were to stoke a fire all day long with just kindling, it would burn hot, die out, burn hot, die out, burn hot, die out. And that's exactly what we're seeing it's happening with blood sugar handling issues, right? And so this advice that you will hear, it persists. I keep thinking it's about to die, but it still persists, that you need to eat every couple of hours is, unless you're pregnant, hogwash. It's truly hogwash. You should not need to eat every couple of hours. You want to build the metabolic flexibility and the ability to use fat as a fuel so that you can last 3 to 4, even more hours in between meals. So it's 2:41 p.m. right this moment. And I will tell you, I haven't had a moment for lunch yet. My last meal was at 8 o'clock this morning, breakfast. And am I hungry? Well, if I think about it, I'm a little hungry, yes, but I'm not like, I'm fully functional. I'm fine. There's no issue. I'll eat afterwards. It's not a big deal. Whereas a few years ago, I couldn't have done this interview with you without, I would have been horrible. I wouldn't have been able to focus. I wouldn't have been able to put together my thoughts. I would have been exclusively thinking about when is this over so I can go eat. I'd probably be a little snarky. The life after sugar is really, really really powerful. And we even talk about, like, the deeper metabolic issues of like pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, full blown diabetes. On all of these things we know are major risk factors for lots of stuff, including the thing that everyone's talking about right now, which we don't have to go into, but that thing, metabolic health, is one of the best things you can do for yourself to support, your immune resiliency in that capacity.
Hmm. I want to leave it on that thought. But I do have one other question for you. We had talked before about, is in one of the strategies to get off of sugar and then to help maintain your blood sugar level, and understand what impact it's having on you. What are some tools you can use?
Okay, so I've got my new favorite tool, which is called a continuous glucose monitor. And this is a little device that you wear. This has been used by diabetics for years to manage their blood sugar levels. But recently it has been made more commercially available for people who are just interested in their metabolic health and understanding the impacts of different dietary triggers, also impact of exercise and stress and sleep on their blood sugar, because all of those pieces actually have a significant impact on your blood sugar handling as well. That's kind of more than we have time to talk about today. But the way a continuous glucose monitor works is it's actually a little thing that you wear normally on the back of your arm. Some people wear it on kind of on the inside of their hip. I think back of the arm is probably the least intrusive place. And it actually inserts a little filament into your arm. You can't feel it. I'm the biggest wimp in the entire world. I was terrified. It took me weeks to actually convince myself to do it, but I promise you, you can't feel it once it's in. So it goes into the back of your arm, and you wear it. And what's happening is it's continually
24 hours a day, even when you're sleeping, or do you take it out?
No, it lasts for 2 weeks. And what happens is it's continuously sampling your glucose levels. And you have a little app on your phone, and you can watch the response to everything you eat. It is so amazing. I personally think everybody should do it for at least a month. There are a couple of great companies that are doing this now. My favorite is called Levels, and Levels Health. And I will say that they have a wait list. It's like 200,000 people at this point, but I do have a secret code. I don't make any money off of this, by the way. This is just simply for those of you who are interested. If you want to scoot to the front of the line, it will scoot you to the front of the line. So I'll make sure that we include that in your follow-up materials here. But what it does is it tells you eat a meal, and you will be able to see the impact on your blood sugar levels of that meal. And it is fascinating. So there's going to be, when I did it, I kind of went in, I'm like, I'm just going to eat all the things and see what does what. And there were certain things I was convinced would cause a blood sugar spike. For example, I'm an endurance runner. I run a ton. So I like my carbs. I don't eat a lot of them, but I do like them. And so with my breakfast, I'll sometimes have like half of a gluten-free bagel. And so I thought, oh man, I'm going to learn the hard way that this is like out completely fine. I was like, wow, like my blood sugar never got above 90. As long as I was, I didn't just eat the bagel. I ate like eggs and veggies. And like I'm eating a lot of other things, but that's part of it. Potatoes. I even look at a potato, my blood sugar spikes. Like I can't even have like a couple of little bites of a potato, no matter what else I'm eating, and my blood sugar spikes through the roof. Oatmeal, really good example. Almost nobody can tolerate oatmeal. And it's kind of amazing the lengths that you have to go to actually make that something that is tolerable. We had a dear friend living with us here who makes an amazing khichdi, which is an Ayurvedic sort of detoxification dish. I had that for lunch one day. Oh, it's just like straight through the roof. So and then coffee. For some people, coffee spikes their blood sugar. Doesn't even touch my blood sugar. So what's really useful about this is you see real time the impacts of every dietary choice you make. So it allows you to be really specific. So, something like our Real Food Reboot, which is the 21-day detox program that Nicole was talking about, something like that gives you really good broad brushstrokes. It's a phenomenal starting point. But then when you're on the other side of that and you're trying to figure out like, well, what's my threshold? Like, what can I add back in and not mess with my blood sugar? Because it's not to say you're never going to eat another carb in the rest of your life. I mean, that's no fun, let alone anything else. It's figuring out what is the balance for you and like, what is your system need in order to stay really metabolically healthy. And so it's fascinating information. You also see things like some foods. I went out, I was traveling, we went out to a Brazilian restaurant, we had this amazing fish stew, and I passed on the rice, I passed on the plantains, I passed on all those things. I just had the fish stew. My blood sugar did not regulate for 24 hours. It literally spiked up and then did this for the next, as I said, 24 hours.
What do you think it was?
I'm sure I'm sure it was loaded with sugar.
Yeah.
It tasted it was like one of those like, wow, this is really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know fish stew could be this good. And so, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was loaded with sugar. Cause as I said, I thought it was being very, sort of virtuous. And I ordered like the veggie side and I had that, but it messed with my blood sugar for the next 24 hours. So you can see the long-term impacts of things. So it's brilliant, eye-opening tool to make much better informed decisions for your body specifically. Because maybe you are, the odd one out that can totally tolerate a bowl of oatmeal in the morning and that lasts you perfectly for the next 5 hours. There are people who do that. They're rare, but there are people who can do that. But if not, you'll learn really quickly.
So does that mean that you can eat bagels now?
I do. I have not all the time, but I do have a little gluten-free something or other with my breakfast most days. I know I should also say I run 45 to 50 miles a week. So it's, when I'm not, I don't know that I would be able to do that. And normally I do eat that meal coming home from right after a run, which makes a big difference. So you'll learn things like if you've had a big workout, what you eat, you have a lot more metabolic flexibility right after a big workout than you would otherwise. The more you train, the type of training you do, all of that will influence how much of a tolerance you have for these things. How much stress. I've watched a super stressful day where I was eating really clean. I watched my blood sugar creep up just from the stress. And as an experiment, I went and I meditated for 30 minutes to see if I could bring my blood sugar levels down, and it did. So it's kind of amazing what you learn about how you can control your own metabolic health through these different lever points, diet being a huge one, but also sleep, exercise, stress management are huge.
Yes. And last question on the monitor, does it tell you what your thresholds are? How does one know what the top and what the bottom is?
It will show you the sort of ideal, what I call the blood sugar happy zone. It will show you what that is, and it will give you it gives you graphs to show you when you go in and out of that, either above it or below it. It also rates every meal you eat. So it gives you these metabolic scores. So the highest score is a 10 out of 10, and then down from there. So it will give you feedback on every meal. So but you can also see the granular detail. You can see what's happening over the course of the night. If you have trouble sleeping, you can see, is it a blood sugar crash? Because you'll be able to see exactly what your blood sugar was doing at that moment. If you wear other tracking devices, like I have my Aura ring right here, if you wear an Aura ring or something like that, they integrate. Yeah. There you go. So they integrate. So they're pulling information from both. I don't totally understand. They're still in beta. So I will say that there's new versions coming out. But the real benefit of being in beta is, anytime I had a question or anything went awry, I got feedback and customer support. Like they were just on it. So there's other ones out there, and we've tested some of them. I just don't like their user interface nearly as much. And I don't think that they provide you the same kind of detail or the same level of analytics, that this one really does. And they've also got a whole education program with it, which is phenomenal. So highly recommend.
Love it. So you don't have to buy all the gadgets. You can do it simply by pulling sugar out of your diet. Yeah. I do love that there are tools that we can use to help us that provide real analytics. And did you have anything else you want to share?
No, just, if you're feeling, if anything about this is sort of calling you and you're thinking, oh, maybe I could do it. Or even if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I could never do that. I like it when I say, oh, I could never do that. It's normally a cue that needs to be the next thing that I do. And it can be really, really life-changing. really life-changing. So we've provided it, I don't know how many pages, like 6 or 7 pages that can walk you through what I was explaining today in terms of the metabolic impacts of sugar, as well as give a list of the things that you want to be focusing on eating and the foods to avoid. And then if you want more support around that, we have our Real Food Reboot program, which is an online program. You can do that at any point, but it walks you through those 21 days, gives you 3 weeks of meal plans plus an additional 40 recipes. So just tons of additional tools and resources to make it even more doable for you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Margaret.
You're so welcome.